Okay, let's go ahead and walk you guys through the process of doing your title integration in Adobe Illustrator. First thing that I'll do is I'll click on File and come down to New, and let's create a document to receive the artwork that we will have scanned and prepped otherwise in Adobe Photoshop. So I want to make sure that the width is set to 6 inches wide by 9 inches tall, or whatever your particular project's dimensions are. Let's go ahead and give this the name of, I'll call mine Faux Book Cover. And I will make sure that my units are set to inches, and I'll go ahead and hit OK. All right, so it creates my artboard right here. And now what I will do is click on File, come down to Place, and go ahead and navigate to wherever you have your image saved. All right. So I'll take this image, and now I go ahead and click where I want it to be placed. All right, now I'm going to grab the regular selection tool if it didn't automatically snap to that upper right-hand corner. If the snapping is not enabled, you can click on View and come down to Snap to Grid. And what this will do is it'll have it snap to increments. I believe these increments will be based on inches because that's what we set up our document as. But we know definitively that that image is placed exactly according to the edges of our document. Now, when I'm doing this kind of work, I usually utilize the layer palette. If it's not automatically visible over here on the right-hand side, go ahead and click on Window and come down and check on the layers. If you double-click on this layer, you can go ahead and change the layer name, and I'll call this one Illustration. Right? When I'm working with multiple layers, I always name my layers so that I know how to sort through them in the event that I need to do some layer editing or management. So I will lock this layer so that I don't inadvertently grab it or do some edit that I catch a little later down the road that throws off my process. So in the layer palette, just like how you would create a new layer in Photoshop, you click on the new layer icon right here, and up will pop this new layer. Now, on this layer, I'm going to go ahead and call this one Text Mockup. All right. Now, you might not necessarily need to do this if you have, been planning and designing the placement of your text in your thumbnails. But just for the sake of you being able to tell what it is that I'm going to be doing, I want to have this separate layer. Now, I'm going to just use the pencil tool, and that is I can get that by clicking on this icon right over here or hitting it on my keyboard. I'm going to draw in the shape of the text box. All right. Now, I'm holding down Shift to make it draw in a straight line. Okay, so I'm going to bring it down here like so. And as I'm designing my text, I'm trying to take into consideration how its placement will work with the rest of my composition. All right, so I am going to arc the bottom of it like this. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just kind of trying to eyeball it to make sure that this general placement will work with everything else. I'm going to use my text or one of my shape tools, which is a rectangle tool. If I click and hold on it, I can have access to other shapes, a rounded rectangle, the ellipse, the polygon, etc. But I'm going to use a rectangle tool to kind of block in where I feel like my placement of my subtitle will be, and then also where I feel like my placement of my the author's names will end up going. Now, something that might help you with the placement of your text relative to the illustration is if we turn on the artboard rulers. That can be done by clicking on View, and then coming down to Rulers and Show Rulers, or you also see that the shortcut key is Command or Control R. Now I can click on this on the left-hand ruler and drag out a new ruler, or a new guide rather. And because this is a 6-inch wide document, I'm going to place it at exactly that 3-inch mark. Now currently my snapping is still on the snap to grid, so I'm going to turn that off. But if you drag out that guide and you hold down Shift, it will still continue to snap to those 1/8 inch increments. Okay, so now that I have kind of the general placement worked out of where I want the text to go, I'm going to go ahead and lock this layer. I'm going to create another layer, a third one, and we'll go ahead and call this maybe text exploration. Okay, now the cover of my book is Pirates, or not the cover, sorry, I'm having a hard time articulating myself today. The title of my book is Pirates, and then there's a subheading, Ye Olde Joke Book. And then the author's name are by Colin and Jackie Hawkins. Okay, so that's what I'm imagining would go up in this area is the Pirates, Ye Olde Joke Book, and then the author's names right down here at the bottom. So I'm going to get started trying to find a good title font to use here. So I'm going to click right off to the side, because this is actually active space that you can use as well, unlike Photoshop. And I'm just going to type Pirates in all uppercase. All right. If I click on just the regular selection tool, it makes that text editable in terms of scaling and stuff. And I'm going to click on the lower left-hand corner and hold down Shift to drag it out and keep it all symmetrical. All right. Now, like the default font for Illustrator, I believe is Myriad Pro, and it's not a font that I would want to use in this application. So I'm going to open up my character palette. Now, if you don't see your character palette over here, once again, click on Window, come down to Type, and select Character, and then it'll pop up. And you can have it floating here over to the side, or you can go ahead and dock it with your other menus and stuff. But if I click on the drop down, then I can scroll all the way to the top, and I'll go ahead and get started with the first font that I have listed there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by exploring my system fonts or the other fonts that I have installed on the computer before I go out and start looking for other solutions that may be found online. All right, so Aardvark it's not the right kind of spirit. It's not the right kind of character. So if I actually select the name and then use the arrow keys, I can toggle through these pretty quickly and pretty easily. So I'm just going to go through them until I find some that stand out to me. That is kind of a fun font, but I don't think it's the right character. Every once in a while, you'll be just moving down through these fonts using the arrow key, and then you can't go through them anymore. It's because you've run into a font that is causing some errors with your system. So you'll actually need to click on the drop down and then manually skip that font and then keep going through your search. I'm going to try and do this quickly. That's a possibility. I like how bold and heavy it is. I like that it's a serif font. It might feel a little too much like a stencil font or something that you would see stenciled on the side of a crate or something. But we'll go ahead and keep it. Now, to drag down another instance of that, I'll just hit Command-Z to back up. I can hold down Alt, click on the font, and then Shift, and that'll allow me to drag a new instance down here. And then I can just click on the font's name and continue cycling through the fonts. So that definitely says pirate. So Alt, click, Shift, drag down an instance, click on the name, and keep going through the fonts. That's a possibility. I'm just going to move it down a little bit. Create another instance. You know what? I think I like the elongated version better. So I'm going to elongated. Select the font, click on the font name. I think that capitals is a possible solution. It's kind of funny and cartoony, kind of fits the aesthetic of the illustration. It feels like a pirate font, but it just does not look good in all caps. I think that's a possible keeper. I like that one. But I think you guys get the idea. And you would just keep going through these until you found, the font that's just right for you. But I actually think I found a font that I'm satisfied with. I kind of like this one right here. It's a Glucester MT Extra condensed. Let's see how this one's going to work. So I am going to hold down Alt. I won't hold down Shift this time. I'm going to place an instance right up here. Now I'm going to use my regular select tool and hold down Shift and scale this up symmetrically. Okay. Scale it back just a hair. And I drop it down a little bit, and I will come over to my character tool. I'll hold down Shift and click on this. Now, if these extra options aren't available to you, click on the little list icon right up here, and you want to show the options. And then that will allow you to come in and be able to scale it just only along that height axis. Now, just a note, when you're scaling text like this, you do kind of start to mess around a little bit with the thins and the thicks and some of the more nuanced aspects of the design. Some designers frown on this quite heavily, but I think for the sake of the type of project that I'm doing, I think I'm going to get away with that. So yeah, I'm relatively pleased with this. And so let's go ahead and change this from editable text to shapes. And we do that by clicking on type at the top, coming down to create outlines. And now I can no longer go in and use a text tool to change this. So make sure that your spelling is correct. What I want to do now is start to consider how I'm going to bend this text into that shape that's back there in the shape box. And to do so, it kind of flattens out here on the two ends. And so I want to leave the P and the S alone. But you see if I click off of the object and I click back on it, Illustrator is recognizing it as one object. It's because these are grouped by virtue of doing the create outlines from the editable text. If I hit Control or Command Shift G and then deselect it, now I can go in and I can select and manipulate individual letters. So I'm actually going to select all of these center letters, and now I'll hit Command or Control G to group those, and then I'll leave the S and the P entirely alone. So with these grouped, I want to conform it to having this bottom arc right here. And that's actually a really easy thing to do. That can be done by clicking on Object, coming down to Envelope Distort, and selecting Make with Warp. Okay. So when this opens up, generally the default setting that you have is it's arced. It's generally going to be arced upwards, something like this. But you have a whole bunch of different options that you can choose from. You can squeeze the text or the shape. You can do a rise. You make it into a fish shape. We kind of joked about that in class. You can bulge it out. There's a lot of different options here. But what we're going to do is we're going to go with a lower arc. And by default, it wants to hang the bottom of that. But all we need to do is take the bend value, and we need to just kind of push it over here into the negative territory until we get to a point where it begins to complement the type of curve that we've drawn as a reference for ourselves. Now, if you can't see what's going on, just make sure that you have this little preview icon selected, and then it will show you the implementation of that lower arc. So when you're satisfied with that, go ahead and hit OK. All right? And then something else that you will need to do is you will need to make this transformation permanent. Right now it's still editable. I could go back in and play around, with the type of deformation, or rather the type of warp, the degree of deformation along the bottom. But to completely commit that, I will want to click on Object, come back down to the Envelope Distort submenu, and we want to select Expand. Okay, now it is permanently committed to those letter forms. And so with that being permanently committed, I actually want to just do something real fast. I'm going to raise this up, but then I want to take the S and the P. I'm selecting it with the wrong tool. I want to select it with the direct select tool, and I'm actually going to lower them down a little bit. All right, I like how that feels a little bit better. Also, I'm not entirely satisfied with this placement right here, so I'm just going to kind of scooch it a little bit more in towards the R and away from the S, and I feel like I'm getting a better balance out of these letter forms now. There are a couple of things that have ended up resulting from that warp that I applied to this, and I'm not really a huge fan on. I don't like how it's tweaked the serifs right down here on the I and on the R. I think it's acceptable with the A and the T in this portion of the E, but I also don't like this hard point right down here on the E. So I want to adjust some of those things. On the I, what I want to do is I want to grab the direct select tool. All right, the shortcut for that is A. And instead of like with the regular select tool, which focuses on the shape as a whole, with the direct select tool, it focuses on the individual points that make up that shape. So I can grab just these 3 points right here and hold down Shift and actually move them up and kind of thicken up that serif. All right, I'm going to do the same thing here on the R. I'll drag a selection over those. I'll thicken this one up a little bit more. I'm actually going to grab more of this P and elevate it a teeny bit more. I'm going to zoom in with Command plus or Command minus does that zoom in. And I don't really care for how this is being managed right here. I can hit N and grab that pencil tool that I introduced you to earlier, and I can actually draw in a new corner to that serif. Get something that's a little softer. It feels a little bit better. I might do the same thing right in here, just with that letter form being selected. I'll just go ahead and draw around that corner and kind of soften that out. And I feel like that feels a little bit better as far as these two letters are concerned. Now over here with the E, it's going to be, we could use that same solution, but I'm imagining that we're going to have a different solution because it comes into a point. A lot of times when there's a point, you can just click on it with the direct select tool, and it will actually present us with another little tool that will soften that corner, but it looks like it's not going to allow us to do it in this particular instance. So I'll use the pencil tool and do it manually. I don't have any problem doing that. All right, just give it a couple of goes. Sometimes you don't get it the first time. All right, and so this complements the S better. You know, this leads our I down into this P better. Actually, I went a little too high, I think, with that I. I'm just going to drop it down once. And I just made that little adjustment with the arrow keys on the keyboard. And actually, I'm noticing this one, you know, I could do a little finagling right up here as well. Maybe missed grabbing all those vertices, so I'll go ahead and move that up. And that feels better too. All right, so I'm much more satisfied with the way that you know, this font right here, so it's a Glucester extra condensed, is fitting into that shape. And I also like the weight of the font. It's heavy. It's something that stands out. It's bold. It's very you know, shape oriented. It's relatively easy to read in the context of everything else we have going on with our illustration. Right, so now the next thing that we need to do is do the placement of the subtitle and then the placement of the author's names. And so at the placement of the subtitle, you know, there's several options here, and generally you might want to go with a font that is not going to be the same as your title font, but one that's going to end up complementing it. And sometimes you actually want to use fonts that are more conservative in situations like this. But because Pirates is a relatively conservative font, I actually wanted to play around with this Bolton elongated. So I'm going to hold down Alt and bring it over here like so. Now by default, the type is set to type out of this left-hand corner, and we can change that by clicking on the Paragraph tab in the Character Palette and choosing a centered alignment. Right, I'll go back to Character and then grab that and place it right in here in the center of the document. And actually, before I type in the text, I want to scale this down. Now I'm going to use the scaling tool that's part of the Character Palette. I'll hold down Shift and click on that so it scales by increments of 10. Let's see how it ends up looking with this with a scale of 40 points. So I'm going to use a text tool, which is right here, and click on that and drag a selection over the word and change it to ye. I'm going to use the old Scottish spelling of old, ye old joke book. Okay. Now, to get off of it being edited text, I'll just click on the direct select tool right up here. And that font scale is a little too large. I'll hold down Shift and scale down just a little bit. 30 might be a little too small. Let's see what 35 looks like if we manually enter that in. And I think I like the direction that is going. Okay. Now, I'd like to try and use the same font for the author's name. So I'm going to hold down Alt, click and hold and drag, and then Shift so it constrains the dragging along that axis. I'll bring it down here, hit T to grab the text tool, double click on the text and select it all with Command or Control A. And I'll type in by colon ampersand Jackie, Jacqui, Hawkins. Right now, definitely this is too big right here. I don't know who Colin and Jackie Hawkins are. I'm not going to call them no-name authors, but they themselves are not a brand. So I'm actually going to minimize the size of their name. So maybe 20 is too small. I think 25 feels good. And it occupies the same relative size that I was anticipating when I did the initial mock-up for the text. So I'm going to turn that text mock-up layer off. All right, so we can start to focus on things here. And I think this font is working really nice here. I think it's kind of getting a little overlooked up here. It's not heavy enough. Now, with most of these fonts, you can click on the second drop-down, and it'll give you options, for a bold option or a semi-bold or an italicized option. Doesn't look like we have those options here, but I can cheat it, okay? Right now, when you're using regular text and you look over in your tool palette, you'll notice down here you have a fill and you have a stroke. And if you click this little arrow, it'll toggle between the two. What I want to do is actually go to the stroke and double click on it. And let's just, for the moment, give it a black stroke. Oops, I didn't give it any stroke. Double click on that again, change it back to black. And that definitely helps that stand out more. But I think it's too heavy. It's implemented too heavy-handedly. We can change that by going to the stroke palette over here. If you don't see the stroke palette, once again, click on Window, come down and turn that on right here. Currently, the stroke on this is set to 1. Let's see what happens if we manually change it to 0.5. All right, I think set to 0.5, it starts to feel better. It starts to feel more in the vein that is appropriate to the book title right up here. But the problem that we're having now is because we've given it this stroke, it's the letter forms are starting to kind of mash together. And we can adjust the kerning on this to space these letters out a little bit more by coming right over here and clicking on the what does it call it? Set the tracking for the selected characters. So increasing the tracking right in here. And I'm going to just try it at 30. Now because, even though these are actually physically centered with one another, I know because of the artboard ruler, or rather the ruler guide. I turned that off earlier. I didn't mention how you can turn it off and on by Command or Control semicolon. Toggles that off and on. It actually looks like it was part of the text mockup layer. So when I hit that visibility, it turned it off. But anyway, sometimes you need to actually optically center it. And so I'm actually trying to pay a little bit more attention with the negative space between the K and with the Y, and kind of scoot that over and scoot that around. Maybe I'll drag a selection over the entire title and the subtitle right here and move it up a hair. So it has a little bit more of a fun, playful interaction with this palm leaf right there. Okay, but down in here, I'm going to just go ahead and leave that alone. I don't want it to be quite as heavy. I don't want it to read on quite the same level as the heading and the subheading. Now, something that I'm going to do with this stroke is I'm actually going to make this permanent. And this next piece of advice is something I'm going to encourage to all of you guys that are working with Illustrator here is when you're getting ready to print from Illustrator or an Illustrator document, I always just click on type and come down and do create outlines. I've gotten burned too many times from having a live font embedded in a document and trying to print that, and then the printer doesn't have the font that you used in the document. And therefore it ends up printing with some crappy replacement font. When you convert this from editable text into a shape, you don't ever have to deal with that problem. Now, let me just back up here. Kind of regather my thoughts. Okay, so now that we have this put together as it currently stands, let's start playing around with colors. Okay. I'm going to take this right down here and press I on my keyboard to get the color select tool. If I hold down Shift and then Command Shift A to Command Shift A to deselect. Oh, you know what? I'm going to undo what I just did. Right over here, I currently have the stroke sitting on top of the fill. I want to hit this little flip icon. Not that one. I want to click on the fill so that I'm color picking the fill as opposed to color picking the stroke. Now I'll hold down Shift and click on the color and Command Shift A to deselect that. I'm trying to pick something that is readable with sufficient amount of contrast, but I don't want it to have as much contrast as maybe some of these up here will have, because I want this to be a slower, maybe like a quadrutiary read. Pirates right up at the top. Actually, I'm going to drag a selection over all of that and hit Command G so it's all grouped together. And I'm going to start by making it this color right here. Okay, now that doesn't give me a lot of immediate contrast, and I think I'm going to put a stroke around it to give it the contrast that I want. But then we have Ye Olde Joke Book right here. Now, if I select the darkest color, the darkest value here, and then we come in and take a look at it, there's a little bit of a problem. First of all, it does start to harmonize with this, but I just don't think it's going to end up being dark enough, especially not where it has this interaction with this palm frond. And then also the second problem that we have is it still has that stroke around it. So I'm actually going to come over here and I'm going to double click on my fill, and then I'm going to manually make this a little darker, but in kind of that same vein of blue. Oops. It would actually help if I had the word selected. So I'll do that again and make it a little darker. Now for the stroke, double click on the stroke and then press I. Let's see. We won't bring up the color picker. Don't double click on it. Just press I. Then hold down Shift and select the inside of that letter, and it'll change the color of the stroke to match the fill. All right, now let's go ahead and just do a little custom treatment with this right up here. I want to play around with something with an effect to try and roughen up this title and give it a little bit more character. So I'm going to select the title. I might zoom in on it a little bit. I'm going to click on Effect, and I'm going to come down to Distort and Transform and choose Roughen. Okay, now at the moment the preview's not on, so let's go ahead and turn that on, and that looks like crap, but we will play around with it, with the settings and try and get them a little bit more precise. I'm going to turn up the detail somewhere into this area, but I'm actually going to turn the size of the roughen down, maybe to 1%. Okay, currently the 1% looks like a little too much. You can actually go down like to 0.1%. Oh, and maybe that wasn't quite enough. There's a little bit happening right there. Let's try 0.2%. Now I'm actually starting to see that. 0.25%. Going to hit OK. Click off to the side to deselect that. And now I'm starting to get something that feels a little earthier, feels a little bit more pirate, a little bit more antiquated to me. And the cool thing is when we start playing around with the stroke, it will actually apply this kind of treatment to the stroke as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, and I'm going to hit Command or Control C, or the same thing can be done by clicking on Edit and coming down to Copy. All right, so I'm going to copy that. Then I'm going to press Command or Control 2, and it's actually going to lock that text. So I can't grab it anymore and do anything with it. But now I'm going to hit Command or Control F as in Frank, and what that does is that pastes in place. So we've placed a second copy of the text on top of the original, directly on top of the original. And I want to take the fill of that and actually use this right here. All right. So this, because this already has a stroke, it actually, took a little bit of that stroke. It took that fill and it applied it to both of that. Or it took the color from this for the fill and for the stroke and then applied it to what we had selected right up here. But so now we've dropped the start color on top of the white. If I come up to, let me see if I can remember where this is at. Object, Transform, or Arrange. I want to do Send to Back. And what this will do is it will place that behind the original artwork, or behind the original text. Now there's not a whole lot of stroke at the moment. We actually need to adjust that, but you can start to see the stroke from that second instance peeking around the first instance of the title. So I'll go ahead and click on it, and I'm actually selecting that first instance. And coming over here to the stroke menu, I'll go ahead and increase that to a point where I start to become satisfied with it. And I actually have no problem with the letters starting to run together like that due to the applied stroke. Okay. Now, I am not a huge fan of what's happening right there, so I'm just going to start to dial it back just a little bit. Okay. And I'll hit Command-Shift-A to deselect. And I'm starting to like how that's looking. Now, this is kind of tangential right here. And we'll deal with that in just a second. But what I want to do is I want to talk about why I have the two instances. The one instance that's kind of the whiter color, and then the second instance where it's the darker color with the stroke. If I had just simply taken the original instance of this and added a stroke to it, the A would actually start to overlap and cut into the R over here. And, that might have started happening with the E and with the top of the R and stuff. It would start to create conflicts in that regard. In this way, because I have the two instances, the one on top of the other, everything that is lighter in color will set on top of everything that's darker in color. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense, but it's the layer ordering that's working towards my advantage right here. Now, one other thing that I can do is I can actually copy what I have right here, and then I'll do another paste in place. And with this other paste in place, so now there's three instances I want to click on Object, come down to Arrange, and I want to send that one to the back as well. And now I'm going to scale it inwards. Now, as I scale, I could just click on this upper right corner with the Shift held down, and it will scale it down to the opposite corner. What I actually want to do is scale it in towards the center. Hang on, it's kind of glitching out on me here. Okay, I'm going to paste that in place again. Object, Arrange, Send to Back. This time I'm going to hold down Alt and then Shift and drag this in, and it will actually start to scale it towards the center. Okay, so now what it does is it makes it look like it has a heavier stroke on the inside of the letter forms, and it kind of gives it a little bit of a faux, like embossed kind of quality. And I'm going to use the arrow key, and I'm going to kind of start to tamp that down just a little bit, so it makes those letters feel more bottom heavy. Now what's cool is with the implied perspective and stuff, it actually also helps to funnel the eye in towards the subheading right there. Okay, and it makes it really easy to read. It really stands out now. Now something else that I'm going to play around with is I can hit Command-Alt-2 to unlock the white treatment of the text, and maybe you want to play around with a little bit of a gradient. Now when you do gradients, keep them subtle. Don't apply them heavy-handedly because they just look trashy and they look cheap. But I think in this instance I can use it to help imply a little bit more of a faux dimensionality to the book cover. And you can turn on the gradient by coming over here and clicking on this option right here. But currently the orientation of the gradient is incorrect. So that should bring up the gradient tool over here in your auxiliary menu. If it doesn't, click on Window and come down and select Gradient. But you can actually change the angle of this. I'm going to change this to -90. All right, so we have the light values at the top, we have the dark values at the bottom. Okay, I want to keep it that way, but I don't want to have it go from white to black because there's no black anywhere else in this illustration. So over here, this gradient slider allows you to manipulate exactly how that gradient works. Okay, I am going to select the black option, press I to get the color picker, and hold down Shift, and I'm going to color pick something from my pre-existing palette. Okay. I'm actually going to pick something that's a little bit more subtle. So it goes from a white into a light blue. Maybe I don't even want to do white. Maybe that's too much because there's also no white in the illustration. There's this really light tint of blue. So I can select that for the top. So it color matches here. The bottom color matches somewhere down in here. I'm going to make that just a little darker like so. Hit Command-Shift-A to deselect that. Okay, so just a couple more things that I want to share with you guys. First of all, the placement of this isn't working as well anymore now that we have we've kind of given it that faux emboss. So I am actually going to hold down Alt and S, and I'm going to scale this in a little bit. And I'm going to drag down a guide from the top and place that along with the with the S and the P, so that I can come in here and actually align this text to that line so that there's a harmony through the alignments. Now, if I press Command semicolon, it'll turn that part guide off. And the last thing that I want to talk with you guys about is kind of getting the text to interact a little bit more with the illustration. Now, this is going to be somewhat tangential, but what if you want to have the text actually go behind a piece of the illustration? That's really easy to do in Photoshop, but it's also possible to do right here in Illustrator. But we need to employ a clipping mask to do so. So what you would need to do is grab the pen tool. It works best with the pen tool. If you've never used a pen tool before, you might need to play around with it a little bit more. You click and it establishes a point, and then you click again, and it draws a line between those 2 points. Now, if you click once and then click and hold and drag, it actually drags out a curve handle, which is what we'll be doing right here to to be able to match the contour of that, that palm frond. So I'll just go ahead and delete those. And click, actually maybe I'll zoom in a couple more times. Click on this contour as best as you can. I'll click right here, just click and hold and drag. And drag that out to where it matches the edge of that palm frond or whatever it is you're drawing an edge around as best as you can. And then if I click this point again, it actually deletes the curve information, the curve handle from the opposite side. And we want to draw this shape around the rest of the text. Because what will end up happening is it will omit whatever is outside of that shape. Okay, so with the shape selected, I hit V to select the direct select tool. I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to select my text as well. So both are selected, and hit Command or Control number 7. And then what it'll do is it'll make it look like the text is going behind a portion of the illustration. Okay. So when everything's good to go and you're satisfied ultimately with the book cover, go ahead and select all your options and just go ahead and delete them. Take any hidden layers and drag them down, drop them in the trash, because when you save this as a PDF, it will show everything, even the hidden layers. Now I'll come up to the top, click on File, come down to Save As. And I'm going to change this from an AI file to an Adobe PDF and hit Save. It goes into PDF specific save, and go ahead and click on that as well. And now you should have a file that's ready to go and print. So I'll just go to where I have that saved to. So we have the faux book cover, 3.2 megabytes. And it should retain the illustration embedded in the actual document with the type solution and everything.